Welcome to Sunday Sermons from the Williamsburg Community Chapel, brought to you by the Chapel Podcast Network. Let's grab our Bibles and open up to the book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. And I'll read verses 1 and 2 now for us as we prepare to hear from lead pastor Travis Simone as he kicks off the season of Epiphany with our new sermon series titled Offering. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come.
Jesus called people to discipleship with two words: follow me. In Matthew 4:19, Jesus said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." In Matthew 8:22, Jesus said, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead." In Luke 5:27, we read this: "After this, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, 'Follow me.'" In Mark 10:21, Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "You lack one thing. Go and sell all you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And come, follow me." John 1:27. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, you guessed it, follow me. Our annual teaching theme is entitled, Follow Me, Disciplines for Disciples. Since September, we've been studying the disciplines disciples must practice to explore or to answer Jesus' call to follow me. So far, we've followed Jesus into worship. We've followed Jesus into waiting. And over the next 6 weeks, we'll follow Jesus in the practice of offering everything God has entrusted. Jesus offered everything God entrusted to him back to God. Jesus ultimately offers forgiveness to all who believe. And as we selected these particular disciplines, there's a variety of disciplines we could have selected. We chose them based on some seasons that the church has historically used to guide their worship practice. Our series on worship was in the season of ordinary time. Our season on waiting was in the season of Advent. And our series on offering comes during the season of Epiphany. If you're not familiar with Epiphany, let me give you a brief primer on Epiphany. As the world packs up Christmas, as the world drags their trees to the curb, as I did this week, so that the city of Williamsburg could recycle it into the mulch for the spring flowers they will plant. As Sophia and I wrestled with a lighted reindeer this week to put it in its proper place in our garage, where it will sit for the next 11 months before it is called back into duty. Just as cries of Merry Christmas are swapped for Happy New Year, the Bible keeps telling the story of Jesus' birth. Matthew chapter 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. See, here is the principle for Epiphany. Gifts follow grace. Gifts follow grace. See, the Christmas story is summarized by John in John 1:14, the great moment where John describes the incarnation of God into the person of Jesus Christ. He says, "And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. When grace appeared in Jesus Christ, gifts are what followed. When the truth of God appeared in Jesus Christ, gifts are what followed. Gifts follow grace. Early in Jesus' ministry, he is the embodiment of God's grace and truth, moving through the region of Galilee. People received the gift of healed bodies, the gift of freedom from demonic oppression, the gift of a new calling to kingdom building work, the gift of cleansing from disease and being restored to their community. The early church, after receiving the gift of grace through forgiveness, receives the gift of the Holy Spirit. Gifts follow grace. Now, for those who have received or would like to explore the grace of God that is available to all in Jesus Christ, we're going to spend the next 6 weeks considering what it means for gifts to follow grace. What could it look like to follow Jesus' pattern of offering the resources that were entrusted to him, and offering forgiveness even when it comes at great cost. We've built this teaching theme around the principle that we'll never know who Jesus is until we follow Jesus where he goes. So let me tell you the story of a gift that followed grace. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. Now, concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. See, there's a 2-year period in the Apostle Paul's ministry where he's engaged in an effort to bring a substantial gift from churches in and around Greece to churches in and around Jerusalem. It's actually quite a big deal in Paul's ministry. It keeps coming up over and over again, but it's spread out across 4 of Paul's letters: Galatians, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Romans. It's also talked about in the book of Acts. So because it's so spread out, we can miss the story of this gift, but it was crucial to Paul's missionary activity, crucial, vital to how Paul saw the spread of the gospel taking place in the first century. You see, the church in Jerusalem faced serious economic pressure due to a scattered membership from persecution. You read it in Acts 6 that the church is scattered. A great persecution arose. So the people that would be supporting the church financially now are no longer able to live in Jerusalem. On top of that, those who were left came under their own financial hardship when a famine struck the region. You can read about that in Acts chapter 11. And as Paul urges participation for this collection for the church in Jerusalem, he teaches, as he goes about asking for this collection, he's teaching biblical principles related to offering the resources God has entrusted to us for the work of God in the church. And I think in this passage, he answers at least 2 questions: why gifts must follow grace, and how our gifts are to follow grace. Why they must follow grace, and how our gifts are to follow grace. Let's talk about the why first. And this is in the second set of verses 3 and 4. Let me read those again for us. Paul says, "And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me." Why gifts must follow grace? Giving shatters idols. Giving shatters idols. See, I ask the question when you read this, why does Paul suggest sending Corinthian believers rather than professional couriers to Jerusalem? As I'll talk about a little later, the journey was quite dangerous. It would have been much easier to send this gift with professionals, and yet he says, when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. It's a brilliant strategy because Paul is attempting to put members of this Corinthian church face to face with people to whom they owe an immense debt for the spiritual riches they inherited from the Jewish faith. These Corinthian believers are Gentiles worshiping a Jewish Messiah. And Paul is concerned that they're growing a bit arrogant in their ability to worship this Jewish Messiah apart from following the Jewish law. And so he wants to remind them of the debt they owe to these believers. He wants to put them face to face. Now, I'll ask another question. Why does Paul say, if it seems advisable for me to go, then they can come with me? You would think Paul would say, if it seems advisable for me to go, then I'll go with them. But Paul wants to stay in charge. And in addition, Paul is clearly advised in Acts 21. It's a fascinating story. I hope I can tell it well over the next few weeks. In Acts 21, Paul is clearly advised not to go to Jerusalem by a prophet named Agabus, and yet he still goes. Again, why? Well, in Romans 15, we learn he's afraid that the Jewish believers won't take the gift, that the Jewish believers have an arrogance among themselves, that they are following Jesus in the correct way, along with keeping some of the Jewish ceremonial laws. So Paul says, and I'm going to go because I don't know if they're going to take it. I want to be there to ensure the exchange happens. And the reason I believe he says, your couriers will accompany me, not I will accompany you. If you read between the lines, I think it's likely because he's afraid the Corinthian believers will look down on the Jewish believers. All this superstition, following these laws that Jesus came to free us from. See, both communities and the individuals that make up those communities have carefully crafted idols of self-sufficiency, self-supremacy, and self-sovereignty. And Paul is teaching them that what will shatter those idols is giving, is offering. That for the Corinthian believers, if they take the gift, it means for the Corinthian believers, if they send the gift, if they participate in this act of offering, they shatter the idolatrous idea that they deserve what they earned. See, these believers hesitate, and we'll see next week that they do hesitate to participate. These believers hesitating to participate in the gift, they forgot something quite crucial about the resources entrusted to them. They forgot that those resources never really belonged to them. Say, how can you say that? How can you say that, Travis? Of course they belong to them. They earned the money at their own jobs. The money was deposited into their hands. If they wanted to, they could put it on deposit with the rudimentary banking system of the first century and have someone have their name, their account marked with their money. They forget. They earned it with hands they did not create. They earned it with feet they did not design. They earned it with a heart pumping blood they could not see and a brain more creative than they ever could have imagined on their own. And this is the consistent teaching about wealth and resources throughout the Bible from cover to cover, that they are not our own. And giving shatters their idolatry that somehow they deserve what they earned. There's a beautiful picture in 1 Chronicles 29 as David works with God's people to take a collection for the building of the temple that his son Solomon will eventually dedicate. Listen to his prayer as he goes about doing this collection. 1 Chronicles 29, 11 through 12, and then verse 14. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. I love how all of what belongs to God just sort of piles up on top of each other as David goes on with his prayer. Yours, Lord, is greatness, power, glory, majesty, splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and to give strength to all. And he continues his prayer in verse 14. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. And if that's a lot to remember, Jesus has some shorthand for us in Matthew 10:8. Jesus looks at his disciples and says simply, freely you have received, freely give. Freely you have received, freely give. And that, embracing that, shatters our idol of self-sufficiency, our idol of I deserve what I earned. Freely you have received, freely give. Giving would also force the Corinthians to shatter another popular idol, the idol of self-security. The journey would be long and dangerous. This is why Paul does not say, let's get some professional couriers to take the money. Let's hire the Brinks truck and armor that vehicle all the way there. No. He says, you're going to go because there's an idol of self-security that somehow if you work hard enough, you can make yourself safe enough. You're going to have to sew these gold coins into your own garments. You're going to have to wonder what lies around every corner. You're going to have to keep watch at night to keep this offering safe for the believers we are bringing it to. They would have to sacrifice their idol of self-sufficiency and self-security. And for the Jewish believers to accept the gift, they must shatter the idolatrous idea that they are somehow better than the Gentile believers. Accepting the gift means admitting they need help. Accepting the gift means exposing the myth that their church, because it's in Jerusalem, has an elevated status among the people of God. And this is why gifts follow grace. Because we all have idols that must be shattered in our lives. I want to pull the curtain back for a moment on how I go about arranging the preaching year. So typically there's a theme that starts when the school year starts in September. There are some variations on that theme throughout the fall. And then by the time I get to the new year, it's a time when a lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe I'll try church again, or maybe I'll try church for the first time inside. I always try to make the variation on the theme come the new year something that I call felt needs. Needs that people feel they already have. So many times people come to church and go, I'm not sure, what that ball guy's talking about today. Maybe it applies to my life. Maybe it doesn't. I try to do my best to help people see where the application might lie. But in the new year, I typically talk about things like relationships and parenting and marriage, because everyone already comes into church thinking, I need to have better relationships. I need to consider how I can improve my marriage. And that's called a felt need. And we'll do some of that at the end of this series when we talk about how to offer forgiveness. But here's the truth about felt needs. Beneath every felt need is a deeper, real need. See, the reason you feel like you'd love to hear a sermon about marriage is because there's a real need for union with your Creator. And your marriage is a signpost. The oneness you experience with your spouse is supposed to point you forward to the oneness you long to experience with your Creator, the oneness that God designed for us to experience in His church, the oneness that we will all experience. And when the new heavens and the new earth are unified together, you have this felt need that is crying out because there's a real need underneath the surface. And so the problem that I faced as a preacher in 2024, I was even nervous during the first service. I'm still a little nervous right now talking about giving. There's nothing that pushes people away from church when they're trying church for the first time to hear a pastor talk about giving and offering. But you see, the real need that we all carry into 2024 is to shut down the idol factory of our heart. That's the real need. And the reason Paul comes to this Corinthian church and is talking about this offering, the reason he's going to go himself to bring it to the church in Jerusalem is because nothing shuts down the idol factories of our hearts like giving, like offering. We have created idols of self-sufficiency, self-supremacy, self-sovereignty, self-security, giving, offering, intentionally releasing the resources God has entrusted to us is the idol-shattering move Paul commanded the Corinthian church, and the Bible still commands the church today. And so that's the real need we're going to be talking about. If I would apply it to maybe a felt need, I've been praying a prayer every morning lately. Some of you may know I'll be talking about it a little bit more at the Chapel Family Update on Wednesday, but talked about it last fall that I have a sabbatical coming up in 2024. And one of my goals on the sabbatical is to deepen my prayer life. And so you don't just want to go on sabbatical and then go, okay, now's the moment. I'm gonna do it. I'm really gonna deepen my prayer life. So I've been trying this fall to sort of ramp up to some of the disciplines I'm going to embrace to deepen my prayer life on sabbatical. And I've been praying this one prayer every morning. Oh God, the author of peace and lover of concord, to know you is eternal life, and to serve you is perfect freedom. To know you is eternal life. To serve is perfect freedom. And so while it will hurt to smash these idols of self-sufficiency, self-supremacy, self-sovereignty, self-security, to know God is perfect freedom. To serve Him, there is eternal life. And so I want to invite you on this idol smashing journey as we track the gift to the Jerusalem church over the next few weeks. C.S. Lewis, as we consider the how here, C.S. Lewis wrote this in his book, Mere Christianity. We have to be continually reminded of what we believe. Neither this belief nor any other will automatically remain alive in the mind. It must be fed. It must be fed. So here's the second question Paul answers. How do we go about offering gifts that follow grace? How do we do it? If you look at verses 1 to 2, I think you'll find these principles. Make giving a priority, make giving private, make giving proportional. Giving must be a priority, it must be private, and it must be proportional. Look at verses 1 through 2. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. First, the priority of giving. Paul says, give on the first day of the week. He doesn't say when you get around to it. If it pops into your head, maybe think about it. Go through half the year and gauge how well your business is doing. No, he says every first day of the week, you're to consider that your heart is an idol factory and you've got to shut that idol factory down. And so you've got to step out and say, God, I release what you've given back to me, back to you. It happens on the first day of the week. This is why C.S. Lewis says these disciplines must be fed. If you don't consider it regularly, in the right priority, the idols will continue to be created by your heart. I'll tell you just a brief story. It's a little embarrassing for me, but there was a time in my life when my giving was not on track. And what helped me get on track with this spiritual discipline of giving was someone pointing out this principle of the priority of giving in my life. I started here at the chapel as the director of high school ministry, and then I became the student ministry pastor. And by the time I was a few years into the student ministry pastor thing, I actually had 3 kids as the student ministry pastor, and I struggled to be faithful in giving. And I was talking to a friend, a wise counselor, about this. I wanted to embrace this discipline, but it wasn't going well. And he said, well, tell me about how you approach this. I said, with 3 kids, I just get to the end of the month and there's just nothing there. And he smiled and he said, not saying this is going to be easy, but the principle may be easy to understand. True biblical giving doesn't happen at the end of the month. It happens at the beginning. See, giving is the priority. We give our first fruits. This is why Paul says on the first day of every week, which is Sunday, which is the day that the believers gathered for worship, when they were singing God's praises, when they were remembering the grace that they had received, Paul says it's that day that you have the best chance to shut down the idol factory of your heart and make giving a priority. I know we have a lot of young families here at the chapel, so if this seems a little simple, I apologize, but this really helped me. So I'm going to get real practical. I see we got a lot of high school students over there. Maybe you remember this for your life, because this really helps me just keep it simple. And if you need more complex, our Agape team has some great budget counselors available. But this is how I do my actual budget. It's called the 4 quarters method. You take what you make, you divide it by 4. Those are the 4 quarters. See, it's quite simple. Again, if you're a young family and you're struggling with budgeting, take everything you make, divide it by 4 quarters. And the first thing is giving and saving. Again, in that order, giving's the priority. So you take 25% of what you make and make sure you're giving and saving 25% of your income. And then the second 25%, that is for your house. How are you going to house yourself? How are you going to provide shelter? And the last 2 quarters, 50%, those are your expenses. That's how you put gas in your car. That's how you buy groceries. That's how you go on a trip. So 25% for giving and saving, 25% for your housing, and 50% for your expenses. It's simple, but doable. And so if you're struggling in this area of budget, I would just recommend add it up, divide it by 4, and make sure 25% adds up to your giving and saving, 25% for your housing, and 50% for your expenditures. That helped me make giving a priority in my family and in my life. The second piece is giving is to be private. Notice that Paul says, on the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up. It's kind of fascinating. He doesn't say, and we're going to pass the plate at church that Sunday. While everyone's feeling good, that's when we're going to collect it. No, he says store it up, and there's an implication here in the Greek language in which Paul's writing that they're to store it up at their house, privately. Why? Well, Jesus gave a warning in Matthew chapter 6. Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. When we make a big public to-do about our giving, guess what happens? A new idol is created. We may be giving up the idol of self-security while we're creating the idol of self-importance. They need me, they need my money, they need my resources. And Jesus says, beware. Beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them. New idols will be created. And this is why it's good every once in a while to say, I don't know what anyone gives here at the chapel. This allows me to treat the highest giver, who I wouldn't know who that person is, the highest giver and the lowest giver exactly the same. And anytime we give and people know about it, we've got to be careful. We've got to be careful because new idols can grow in our hearts. This on one level puts the church at somewhat of a disadvantage when it comes to giving, because you don't get an extra pat on the back from me. You don't get special access to my office, or I don't return your phone call faster because I go, oh no, what's gonna happen if they, I don't know. On another level, it makes the practice of giving in the church quite pure, and it helps to lead to this goal that Paul has, I believe, for giving to be truly about shutting down the idol factories in our hearts. But there's a tension with keeping our giving private. Sometimes the heart can be quite deceptive. Many times the heart can be quite deceptive. So put the point about giving being private and the last point about giving being proportional in tension with one another. Let me read to you from a different translation, verse 2, that gets at this idea of the proportionality of our giving. On the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. Paul is clear that the gift should be commensurate to your income. You will lose the idol-shattering power of giving if you remain in control. You know, you could make $500,000 in a year and feel quite generous giving 10% and making a $50,000 gift. And you know what? You might still be able to get by on $450,000. It's possible. But Paul says, give in proportion to your income. It needs to cost. It needs to make you go, oh, I've stepped out so far that now I need the Lord to show up to fill this gap of provision in my life. So how we make gifts that follow grace, or we make them a priority, we make them privately, and we make them proportional, because giving follows grace. And grace also follows giving. So here's the surprise. If you look at verse 3, when Paul talks about carrying your gift to Jerusalem, I'm gonna pull back the curtain here for a moment. Gift, grace, same word in Greek. It's the word charis. Charis can either be translated as the grace of God or the gift of a person. And this is why on the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, he broke it. He said, this is my body, which is given for you, which is graced for you. Jesus' body becomes the ultimate offer of grace. That Jesus does not merely come to live among us, to live with us, but Jesus came to live in us. And we can receive his gift by faith now, by placing our ultimate trust in him. Because grace follows Jesus' gift. Our gifts follow the way of his grace. Gifts follow grace, and grace follows gifts.
Thank you for joining us today. Here at the Williamsburg Community Chapel, we are all about making disciples of Jesus Christ. So wherever you are on your spiritual journey, we hope you will take up this call of Jesus to follow me as we consider these disciplines for disciples.